The title of this presentation is what got you people in here. I don't know how good of a presentation it's going to be, but we thought it was a great title, so we come up with that. So what we're going to talk about today starts out a long time ago, and I'm going to put some different things up on the screen, and we'll start with this one. Okay.
Can you hear okay, guys?
This is what this picture is here is the original plotted map by the surveyors that surveyed out Washington Township in 1827. Indiana was a state in 1816. They decided that we needed 10 more miles on the top of it so that we could have a port on Lake Michigan. So the surveyors come in and plotted off 10 more miles at the top of the Indiana state line before Bristol was here, and this is what they come up with. This is the drawings of the actual surveyor that did it, and what I brought this out for is I wanted to go over what it looked like before there was a town here, so we can go from there. This is the St. Joe River coming in up off of County Road 25, and it comes down, makes a couple turns here, and here's where Trout Creek dumps into the St. Joe River. There are 4 bodies of water off to the north and west. This is Indiana Lake. This is Round Lake. This is actually the Nature Conservancy. At the time on all the maps you'll see it called Greenland Lake because the people that owned this property were named Greenland. And then this little body of water here, I don't know that it's got a proper name. It doesn't have a bottom, but I've got a name for it, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. And here goes the river downstream in the St. Joe River. We get this little island that we used to camp out on when we were kids right in here, and right in here, and then right here is the island just south of where the toll road goes across today. You go south of there and Little Elkhart River dumps into the St. Joe. Little Elkhart River flows over, of course, over in the Middlebury-Bonneville Mill, and it dumps into the St. Joe right north of Hermann's Park. This was all done in 1827. Bristol wasn't here yet. Right here's where the bridge goes across this direction, and you go around the bend here and a couple little islands. Down here you're going to see Burke's Island, and then there's 2. The neat thing about this is when they surveyed this off, I'd always heard this referred to as the marsh. Before there were any houses and anything here, it was a great wet marsh, and it had 2 drainage systems that come through here. One of them was Sheep Creek that runs in right by Timber Brook, and then there was another one that run out of the middle of that eventually, I take it was probably closed off by the railroad, but we're going to talk about that here after a bit too. So this is what Washington Township looked like in 1827. All right, less than 50 years later, Bristol's been established. Okay, there we go. All right, here's the bridge, Bristol Bridge. Here's the original town of Bristol, plotted off to the side here, platted out. Congdon Park is all platted out. Fowler's addition here to the west, but for the most part, everything west of Division Street here was still pretty wild and woolly.
What year is that?
This is 1874. This is out of the 1874 plat book. And I'll show you what Washington Township looked like in 1874. Here's what Bristol looks like in Washington Township. Here's the Fowler addition off to the west side of Division Street. Everything north of the intersection here, from the bridge clear to the other side of what today would be the water treatment plant, there were only 2 houses on that side of the road. Cathcart's had one, and a fellow by the name of William Palin had one, and those were the only 2 houses on that side of the road. Now the neat thing about these plat books back then is they listed a lot of the citizens that were in the communities. This plat book shows the entire Elkhart County, but it's broke down by townships and town, the citizens. Here's a directory in 1874 of citizens in Washington Township, Bristol. If you look right over here, there's a fellow by the name of John Boyer. He came to Bristol, Washington Township in 1861, started the Civil War from Winona County, Pennsylvania. And there was a lot of people from Pennsylvania came to Bristol and came into Washington Township. John Boyer, his business, his making a living as a miller, a grist miller. And so if we go back to the 1874 Washington Township plat book, you'll see Mr. Miller, or Mr. Boyer, had bought property along the Little Elkhart River. He owned property on both sides of the river, and he set up a grist mill on the raceway that comes out of the Little Elkhart River. This would be State Road 15 North today, and he had a mill here. Head race, tail race runs back into Little Elkhart. Most all of Bristol had been platted to the east of that original bridge. Most all the activity was going on here. One thing that I thought was kind of neat, doing all this, looking through all these maps and all this research, if you go upstream on the St. Joe River to where Trout Creek dumps in, Mr. Boyer had bought both sides of Trout Creek all the way up to what would be County Road 2 today. And I don't know that he'd put in any type of mills there, but it certainly, if you were a miller, you'd want to buy some water that moved, and he owned both sides of Trout Creek, where, as I was growing up, that's where Mrs. Beeler owned. But he owned both sides of the property all the way up to County Road 2. So he's sailing along doing business as a miller, and that was in 1874. I'm gonna switch to I'll switch back to that to show you what happened here. He set up over here on the Little Elkhart River. Downstream, 6 businessmen decided that they'd take advantage of the St. Joe River's water power, and they established a company called the Bristol Hydraulic Corporation. The people that did that were Solomon Fowler, William Palin, who owned the property, where's it at? He owned all this property in through here. William Probasco, William Hall, and a fellow by the name of A.P. Wright. They pooled their sources and their finances and started what would be called the Bristol Hydraulic Corporation. They invested $50,000 in this investment, and it doesn't show on this map, so it's going to be a little bit confusing, but I'm going to switch ahead so you can see it. Washington Township, 1892. Here's the dam that they built to back the water up. This is how it was platted out. This shows in 1874. This today is called Shore Manor subdivision, right across from the Solomon Fowler house, and where Bogers lived when I was growing up. But this was all plotted out as a business to take place here in this little cove, and the dam went across right in through here, backed the water up into the head race, and they established several different businesses down there. One of them was a 5-story flour mill where they ground a lot of wheat. One of them was a sawmill where they produced a lot of wood to build furniture, and there was a furniture factory down there also. These 6 men had started this enterprise up by backing up the river. Several different mills were in here. They franchised off 70 lots in this section to bring future business into Bristol, and they had quite an enterprise going here. They'd invested $50,000. They built a dam across the river right here. The dam itself was 200 feet long. Now, a dam built back in those days weren't built out of iron and steel and stuff like that. It was built out of trees and logs, and it wasn't really a brush dam, but it wasn't a real permanent dam either. But they succeeded in damming up the river 200 feet across, and in the course of building that dam, a Bristol resident by the name of Caldwell drowned going over the top of the dam when they were doing it. But eventually they got that dam built, got the water going through the head race. They backed up 5 foot of water in what would have been a shallow part of the river at that time. 5 foot of water backed up. Now that's a pretty impressive chunk of water, and that ran several nice mills down here. And like I say, there was a lumber yard, there was a flour mill, and several other endeavors to produce energy. And they had a pretty good business going. They were franchising these lots off. This was going to become a business district in the town of Bristol. Okay, so we're going to go back to Washington Township, 1874, and do a little bit of a review here. So John Boyer has the mill that's going here on the race of the Little Elkhart River. The gentleman I just spoke of had a dam across the St. Joe River, backed up 5 foot of water with a 200-foot dam, and are running all these mills down here in the Bristol Hydraulic Corporation. Or the best map is the 1992 plat book. It's going to show what's going to happen here. Mr. Boyer's dam is here. The Bristol Hydraulic Company's dam is here. He's holding back 5 foot of water now. Water's backing up. All of a sudden, the mill of Mr. Boyer comes to a grinding halt. Yes. And I don't know whether that's where grinding halt come from, but the grinding halted. The mill stopped. Mr. Boyer was not happy. Mr. Boyer files a lawsuit against the 6 gentlemen that own Bristol Hydraulics. Tempers started flaring in the town of Bristol. Mr. Boyer wasn't the only person who was feeling damaged. When you hold 5 foot of water, other adverse conditions are stagnant water, mosquitoes, mud. And if you've been in that river, you know right here along this side, if you're out of the main channel of the river, water's going to channel here, pool up all along here, right up here to Mr. Boyer's mill race would have been nothing but muddy water. And the people in town were complaining about the mosquitoes. I would imagine that all of Congdon Park would have been wet. I'm just trying to figure out what that would be like. Slats' swamp would have filled up, and a lot of this water would have been well, during that period of time, during the 1870s, and that nobody really knew that the mosquitoes were the cause of malaria. And mosquitoes were causing, other diseases, infected mosquitoes, but, they found out later that mosquitoes themselves caused malaria, and these people were getting sick. Doctors didn't know what it was, but probably from the mosquitoes probably caused a little bit of damage with that. Well, Mr. Boyer had filed lawsuit along with his legal representative, is a fellow by the name of Owen Coffin. Lives along here, and I'm trying to find out more about Mr. Coffin. Excuse me, and at this point, I haven't found out a whole lot yet, but he was one of the ones that was pushing Mr. Boyer to do this lawsuit. These guys were locking horns down here in the Bristol Hydraulics. Big business is going on. Things are doing well, and the town's in an uproar. And suddenly, one day, the 5-story flour mill that was located right down here mysteriously caught fire. Well, a 5-story wooden structure covered in mill dust in 1870 without a fire department is going to do one thing, and that's going to be burned to the ground. And that's what it did, burnt to the ground. And the people that had the money invested in this business couldn't reinvest and rebuild it because their money is going into legal fees, and they're not sure as to what's going on as far as who's going to win this lawsuit. So they lost one of their money makers down there in the grist mill, or when the flour mill went down. This flour mill had been pretty prosperous. They were grinding up all the wheat in Washington Township, surrounding areas, making flour. The furniture factory was there with the sawmill. It was considered one of the largest lumber yards in Elkhart County. The furniture company was making walnut furniture that was being sold as far away as Chicago, and they had quite a business going on down there. But the flour mill burnt down, and not too long later, the furniture factory caught fire. And again, a big wooden structure, no fire department, it went down to the post also. So the Bristol Hydraulic Company looked a lot like this. All these franchise businesses and lots coming in here. They didn't have any way to make any money at that point. The two businesses were gone. They had pending lawsuit. They had a wooden 200-foot dam going across here that would need a lot more maintenance than a cement dam would. So they didn't have any more money to invest in the upkeep of the dam. Their two main businesses had burnt, and they had a lawsuit against them. So things weren't looking real good for them. And then eventually, Mr. Boyer here won the lawsuit, Elkhart County lawsuit. Elkhart County found that Mr. Boyer was suffering undeniable damage for the water backing up against his millwright, and the stagnant water that was along there was not doing anybody any favors, caused problems. So Mr. Boyer wins the lawsuit. These guys have to pay the damages down here at Bristol Hydraulics. They have no assets. Their two businesses are burnt down. The dam is the only asset they have with two burnt up businesses, and the dam's leaking. So Mr. Boyer somehow got some logs pulled out of the dam. When the dam started leaking, eventually washed out, and the dam was gone, the river settled back to its normal level. There were attempts to revive the Bristol Hydraulic Corporation after this had gone through, but nobody wanted to get involved with it with the impending water rights, and nobody knew how much water rights Mr. Boyer had to the St. Joe River, so they didn't want to do anything. And eventually there was a dam put in downriver in Elkhart and made it a moot point anyway. So that was the end of Bristol Hydraulic Corporation. And a lot of the reading that I've done said they had the opportunity with the start that they had, that Bristol could have possibly been another Grand Rapids in the furniture business with the start they had on the St. Joe River, but that all went sideways, and that was the end of Bristol Hydraulics. On Monday, Steve and I went down to where the Bristol Hydraulics Company was. This is behind the water treatment plant, and you can still see the tail race. This water that's this groove that's cut in the ground is where the water after the dam went through this piece of ground and then ended up in the St. Joe River downstream. So that's what we see of it left today, is just a groove in the dirt. So anyway, that's the story of Bristol Hydraulic Corporation.